Hi, and welcome to Grading Essays Made Easy. I'm Sharon Watson of Writing with Sharon Watson, and I'm here with my trash to talk about point orders today. Your students have written an essay. Your middle school students or high school students have written an essay, and you're looking at it and trying to decide how to grade it. We're only going to ask one question of the essay today, and that is this: are the points arranged in a logical and effective order? In order for us to know that, we have to know a little bit about point orders. So here's a little tutorial for you on point orders, all around the subject of trash. I'm here today with my husband Terry, who's going to be helping me present these point orders to you. The first one we're going to talk about is the order of importance, or the emphatic order. It's actually a family of 3 orders, and we'll talk about all of those today. The first in the order of importance is the inverted triangle. I'm sure you're familiar with that with newspaper writing. You begin with the most important point, you move on to the next important point, the next one, and the next one, and finally you get to the least important point. The climactic order is the exact opposite of that, in which you begin with your least important point and you move through and you get to your most important point. The last in this order of importance family is the psychological order. And this is what it looks like. You begin with your second most important point and you move down through your points to your least, but then you end with a big bang. But most important is, and then you talk about your most important point. The next point that we'll talk about is the chronological order. The chronological order, of course, moves something through time. So let's say your student is doing an essay on trash, and he's going to move through time. For instance, you can use it like this: How not taking the garbage out affects my family in the morning, how it affects them in the afternoon, or how it affects them in the evening. You could also say how not taking out the trash affected me last week, affects me today, and affects me next week. This is moving anything through time. If your student were to write a really interesting essay on trash and use the chronological order, he or she could start with perhaps how the ancients treated their trash using archaeological evidence, moving through to how the Greeks dealt with their garbage, how the Romans did with theirs, moved to the Middle Ages, and then today. That would be an interesting essay. I'd love to read it. The next point order that we're going to talk about is the spatial order. If the chronological order moves things through time, the spatial order moves them through locations. So if you were going to talk about trash on the earth, so to speak, you would start perhaps with an interesting problem, and that would be Japan. Here we have a nation, but it's an island. So what do they do with their trash? How do they deal with it in an enclosed space? Next, you would move to, say, the Philippines. A friend of mine just got back from Iloilo, Philippines. It's a large city. She reported to me that there's a huge dump there. And there are at least 10,000 people that live on the dump and around the dump. They salvage things from the dump. They resell them. They recycle them. They are living off the dump. So this would be an interesting thing to put in a report. Perhaps, so we've gone from Japan to the Philippines. Now let's go to Egypt. How does Egypt treat its garbage? And then move to Italy, and then end with England, another nation that is an island state. And I probably should say the British Isles, not England. And then the last point order that we'll talk about today is the effect size order. You're already familiar with this in your life. If you take a little pebble and you throw it into a pond, and there's a small space a larger ripple, and a larger ripple. And this is what the effect size order is. It affects a small group of people. Your next point will move to how it affects a larger group of people, and then the last points will be the larger and larger effect, or more and more people. I'll give you an example of this. There was a man who was a hoarder. He hoarded so well and so efficiently that he was unable to live in his house anymore. He lived in his car, and he slept in his car. And this wasn't all, but it also affected the neighborhood. So you have himself being affected, you have his home and his yard being affected, and it also affected his neighborhood because of rats. Now, let's look at it this way. In the effect size order, if the man is the most important thing to your student, then your student will begin with how it affected the neighborhood, begin and then move to how it affected the man's house and his yard, and then how the effect of being a hoarder, how that affected him. That ends this short tutorial on point orders. There are others, and you may find some more in my textbook, The Power in Your Hands, Writing Nonfiction in High School. Thank you. If you go to my website, writingwithsharonwatson.com, you can subscribe to my fun middle school prompts, my engaging high school prompts, or my informative blog. If you subscribe to any of those, you can get free writing lessons. I'll also provide a link in the description box below so that you can go to the first video in this series, which asked 6 key questions of your essay, of your child's essay. And those were presented in a point order that I haven't even mentioned today, and that is from the most obvious to the least obvious. So you see, your student has many, many possibilities for point orders, and now it becomes your job to look at them and see, have they been presented in this essay in the most logical and effective order. Thanks for stopping by today. I'll see you next time.